The heads or tails program is going to use two variables. The first variable is going to store the user input, and that's going to be stored in a variable called answer. The second variable is the computer picking heads or tails, and that's going to be stored in a variable called computer pick. So the first line of the program asks the user to either enter in heads or the word tails. And one of these will be stored in the variable called answer. In this case, we've stored a string of text called heads in the variable called answer, so we can use this at any point in our program. Now for the computer pick variable, we're going to get the computer to pick a random number of 0 or 1. Let's say it's picked 0 in this case. Then the next bit of code says, if the computer picks 0, then change the value from 0 to the word heads. So now this variable also contains the word heads. Now keep in mind, a variable can only hold one value at a time. So the number 0 was replaced with the word heads. The final step then is to compare the two variables. Compare the variable answer pick to computer pick. If they match, which they do in this case, then you will display the words, yes, you got it. If computer pick contained a different word to answer, as in this case, well then the line of code would read, sorry, try again. Now that we've looked at the layout of the logic, let's look at building these programs. Now let's look at the steps here. So we ask the player to pick heads or tails, and we store the player's guess in a variable called answer. The next step was to get the computer to pick heads or tails, and then the last step was to compare the user's guess up here to the computer's pick. So there's only 3 steps involved. If we look at step 1, the variable is called answer, and to get that we use the input and we say pick heads or tails. So if we just run that part, you see it asks whatever is written in the quotation marks here, and there's space for the user to either heads or tails. The next step is to toss the coin to get the computer's pick. Now to do this, we need to import random. Once we've imported random, we can then use a method of random, which is random integer 0 or 1. And again, we store that in the second variable. This one is called computer pick. So computer pick has the value of a random number between 0 or 1. If computer pick has the value of 0, then do this. If it picks 1, then do this. So essentially what happens is computer pick would have the value of 0 inside it at this point. If it does, it comes to here, it reads this line and says, okay, change the value inside the container from 0 to the word heads. Similarly, if it picked 1, the computer pick would change from 1 to the word tails. So first 2 steps are complete. The last step is to compare the user's input of heads or tails to the computer's pick of heads or tails. So if that variable is the same as that variable, in other words, if both variables contain the same value, then this line of code will run, which says print over to here the words, you guessed it, I picked, and what we do at the end here is just actually display the value of this variable. So at this point, it will be whatever the computer has picked, whether it's heads or tails. Now, if they do not match, well, then you will print, sorry, I picked, and again, you will display whatever the computer picked. And that works because you want to feed back to the player what the computer actually picked. Now let's run this and see it in practice. So this is this part here, pick heads or tails. I'm going to type in heads, and that's going to get stored in the variable called answer. Now, very quickly, the computer has picked number 1, changed it to tails, and then it's compared my heads to the tails and said, sorry, I picked tails. So I'm going to pick heads again and see if we get a match this time. So this time, I entered the word heads and stored it in this variable. The computer picked 0, that was changed to heads, and then when it compared my guess to the computer pick, it said yes, there was a match because it picked heads. Okay, let's have a look now in JavaScript. Now again, ask the user to pick heads or tails and store it in a variable called answer. The computer picks a random number of 0 or 1. If it picks 0, change the value to heads, otherwise change it to tails. And now we compare the two variables. If answer is the same as computer pick, then output to over here, which is document.write, you guessed it, I picked, and display the computer pick. Let's run it and see. So at this point, we've put up the prompt box, and I'm going to enter in tails. See if I can trick the computer. So it's picked 1 out of the 2 choices here, changed it to tails, compared my tails to that tails, and has picked it. Okay, so I'm going to close this video off, but what I'm going to do for you, if you found that you want a bit more explanation as to how all this works, I'm going to do a second video of building the heads or tails game from the ground up, and I'm going to actually start with Scratch, make it in Scratch, we'll make it in Python, and we'll make it in JavaScript.